Alright everyone, hello, and today we're talking about our spice of the month, which is of course nutmeg, one of the 5 spices in pumpkin spice. By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out. So, like a lot of the spices that we associate with all of our, autumn and wintertime favorites, like cinnamon, like nutmeg, like other things, they actually don't come from European areas, rather they come from, the Middle and Southeast Asia, right? So this, for instance, nutmeg, is actually from Indonesia, and in Indonesia this is used for a lot of different things, but where it came from in Europe is, in fact, from the Portuguese, British, and French spice trades and spice wars. So nutmeg as a spice was discovered in the 1600s, and around that time the Portuguese had a really tight control of it. They battled over that island, and they really, came in, did the old colonial shindig, and snatched up that nutmeg trade. They had a monopoly on it for a really, really long time. And eventually, they ended up trading hands with it, not by choice, but by war, right? Because the British and the Dutch and the French and everyone else wanted a piece of that spice pie. So, in the mix of a lot of conflict, war, agreements, so on and so forth, there ended up being quite a profitable market for Western European, colonial forces to come into Indonesia, to take up all this spice for themselves and to make a huge profit on it. And before they came, it was Arabic people and Indonesian people who had a big control of the spice market, mostly, from trading and everything else. And afterwards, it just kind of became a, this is mine now, and I'm going to keep it. But of course, that didn't really work because others, like the French, managed to smuggle some of it onto different islands that they owned and to start their own nutmeg production there. And even a case of seed-bearing pigeons taking the nut and carrying it off to other islands made it so that other people found islands where nutmeg was growing that they could also use when they sailed over there. But nutmeg itself has been around for a long, long time, and like cinnamon, which is the bark of, the Ceylon tree, right? Nutmeg is a nut. And in fact, you might have also noticed that there's something called mace, and if you ever look at a nutmeg, it's because the nut itself, the outside, you can also grate and use the outside on things, and that is called mace, which has a few different uses than the actual nutmeg itself. Nutmeg as a word comes from kind of like a word that basically means like a really musky nut, right? And that's kind of why also in Slovenian, which had some contact with that Roman language, as the Carantanians, they'll call it muscat, because muscata means like that musk, right? So the word nutmeg basically just means musky seed, musky nut, because it has a very strong smell. I mean, if you've ever picked it up yourself, it's like, it's not floral, but it's not super spicy either. It almost smells like if you mixed spice and soap, in a way. That's the best way I can describe it. When it comes to the culinary uses of nutmeg, like most things that Europeans find, they end up throwing it into a lot of sweet dishes. They can also throw it into savory stuff, but where do we know nutmeg best is obviously in pumpkin spice. So pumpkin pies, any kind of, caramelized pears or fruits, especially autumn fruits, apples, apple pie, nutmeg's a key player in that. You find it a lot in those sweet dishes, but there are also a lot of really, really good Indonesian dishes that use this, such as pork stews, chicken stews, other things like that, savory dishes that make use of nutmeg. In fact, even I will use this in savory things. For instance, my sausage and peppers recipe, I actually do include a little bit of nutmeg because nutmeg actually goes pretty well in certain types of red sauces or other braised meats. This reminds me almost of the coconut too, right? Where, in Latin America, cocoa or cacao was used more for savory purposes. Think of like, mole sauces or other things where that cocoa is a nice, almost bitter, earthy flavor that you put on chicken and other things. Meanwhile, the Europeans get their hands on it and suddenly they're combining it with all the sugar in the world to make chocolate, right? So something similar happened with nutmeg in that originally it's used as more of a savory spice. It's something that, goes with a lot of chicken and pork and other things like that. But when Europeans found it and they said, oh, this is expensive and good and we like it, they started using it on things like autumn fruits. They started using it in, spiced wines. They started using it in sweet things, sweet dishes, pies, cakes, cookies, other stuff like that. And they also started using it on certain kinds of braised meat, especially ones in the autumn that would go with things like cranberries or, you know, other kinds of berries out there, right? Maybe not cranberries, I think those are American, but other similar berries or, you know, autumn fruits, grape, apple, anything like that. I mean, if you have like apple roasted pork, for instance, this would go really well. And as those other floral flavors like rosemary, sage, they all kind of go with that flavor profile. And especially stuff like walnuts, other things like that, they go with this kind of spice. And it's a great spice to have for those colder times of year. And as you might know, if you've ever used nutmeg in something, you do not use a lot of it. It's a very powerful spice. Just like you have allspice and clove are very intense, nutmeg, likewise, is about in the same ratio as those two. So whenever you have something like apple pie, and you'll notice that it says to put like a tablespoon of cinnamon, but like 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg, that's because this is very, very, very potent. And it also has some interesting medicinal effects that you could still get even with that tiny amount. So one of the medicinal effects of this here is actually that it may help you with digestion. It's slightly carminative. And so because of that, it can help with digestion, it can help slow things down a little bit, or speed them up, you know, just gives you some of that comfort in your stomach. Nutmeg is also used as something that is anti-nausea, and so it kind of beats back nausea, and it also can help stimulate your appetite a little bit, which is pretty good, right? So that's all well and good. However, there is something to be said about the fact that in high enough dosages, nutmeg can actually be toxic. It can be toxic, and it can even have some hallucinogenic properties, which is wild to think about. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that ground nutmeg was going to have hallucinogenic properties, but have enough of it and yeah, you might get there. You also might get severely sick. But again, knowing that like 1/4 of a teaspoon of this is good enough for an entire pie, I don't think you have to worry about eating too much. Again, always be safe, always know your dosages, follow recipes, don't try to like make tea or consume large quantities of this. But the amount that you put in your pies is pretty much fine. Now, folklore-wise is where we have a lot of fun with this, right? So nutmeg has a lot of properties that are common for most spices of its type, right? It's a fiery little spice. It's got a real big kick to it. It is definitely considered protective. People would, you know, keep this around to keep all kinds of evil spirits out, ward away evil, very popular for warding evil away. Although in certain cultures, it was also believed to attract love at the same time. If you put one little piece of nutmeg under your armpit, that was said to attract lovers. I don't know if maybe because the smell of it kind of masked any like natural body odors you might have in your armpit, or just for the sake of the nutmeg itself. But it could attract love, and it could also scare away evil. So when you were thinking of things that you're putting this into, and you notice that in, say, pumpkin spice, which is clove, allspice, ginger, cinnamon, and nutmeg, that all of these have some kind of prosperous and also protective qualities. It's no coincidence in my mind that around the time of year that Europeans consider to be such a time of the veil lifting, of spirits running around, of things getting dark and scary and spooky, that so many of the spices we associate with this time of year in our cultures now have to do with protection, light, warmth, fire, and general luck and prosperity, right? So, nutmeg is a great supporting force in any of your spells that you need to do to ward away evil, to attract love and luck, and just general, you know, good times, and to cast out any evil spirits. This guy, absolutely your jam. So, that is something to think about when it comes to all of the baked goods you're going to make this time of year. And with that, I wish you guys a very happy baking, a very happy cooking, and get creative with nutmeg a little bit. If you've never thought to use it in a savory dish before, definitely try doing so, because it is really, really good, and it adds a really nice complexity of flavor that you're not going to find if you always relegate this to your baking shelf. So, with all that said, I will see you guys next week for some more chats on all things interesting in the kitchen this October, and I'll see you around. Bye!